All right, hey guys, and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to look at the first blog of the series of our complete AI trade, and we look at the physics behind the AI trade, right? So, in today's article, I will basically just introduce you to the five laws of physics, and then I will talk about thermodynamics a bit. I will talk about thermodynamics not from a scientific concept, right? Like, that's not the core concern. The concern that you need to understand is, as an investor, as somebody who's looking at AI as an investment sector, what does thermodynamics actually enforce? And so what are the constraints, and what does that constraint mean to me as an investor? So first, starting with the physics lens, physics is basically the baseline for the natural world. It's and it also is the absolute ceiling for any problem that we solve. Right, everything above the physics layer is basically a human choice. So I basically got the inspiration for this video from Elon Musk, who speaks about this. Now, the analysis that follows is basically grounded in the constraints and opportunities that physics affords. Like, I don't care about news and narratives. All I want to know is, what are the fundamental physical concepts, the rules of the laws of physics that apply to artificial intelligence, and can I use this knowledge to build an AI portfolio that's solid, that's not driven by narratives, right? And this basically brings me to the physics behind the AI trade. It's basically it's basically the five laws that govern the creation of AI, like through its entire life cycle. So when I was doing my research, I came across like five laws. Let me go through each one of them very, very quickly. The first one is the law of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is basically, the law of physics related to heat, and it basically says that whenever there is a system and there is any change that happens in a system, let's say a computer system, at the level of bits, you're basically doing bit erasure, and every time there is a bit erasure, let's say there is nothing and you go to 0 or 1, there you that's that change creates entropy in the system, and that energy entropy must be released in the environment, and that basically means generation of heat. And so the law of thermodynamics sets two essential constraints on compute is important because compute is how AI comes into existence. So we'll talk about that. That's basically going to be this article. The other four laws, speed of light, quantum mechanics, Shannon's theorem, and diffraction limit, stuff that we're going to talk about later. Once again, each one of these laws, I don't care about the physics behind it. What I want to know is, what are the constraints that these laws enforce on AI, and how can I use this information to identify the companies that operate in these constraints and are the most critical pieces of the AI trade, right? So again, like, thermodynamics is already the dominant like cost driver in AI infrastructure. The energy and the cooling build out it demands is basically leading all of the capital allocation decisions across every stakeholder. And in fact, there was this data which was published by Goldman Sachs recently. And by the way, guys, this blog, it's available on Substack. It's live right now, and I have a link to that Substack right below. So if you want to explore all of these numbers, you want to go to the original resources. I've cited all of them right below this article. So, anyways, so Goldman Sachs says that a cumulative $736 billion in capex will be done by the five largest hyperscalers. Right, this includes Amazon. This includes Google, Microsoft, Meta, and Nvidia. Like, these companies, they're spending $730 billion. A lot of them that was spent in 20 or committed in 2025, and a lot of that will be committed in 2026. And going further, I found another very interesting data point from McKinsey, which published a report on data center spends, and they basically, for their base case, have projected or forecasted a total investment of $5.2 trillion in the global AI data center build out. So, of that $5 trillion, guys, approximately $1.3 trillion will flow into what McKinsey calls or terms as energizers, Basically, these are all of the companies which operate in the power, in the grid infra, and in the cooling infrastructure categories, right? So these are like foundational companies which are required, not optional, required by the second law of thermodynamics, and the heat that is being generated and the compute that needs to be done to deal with all of that. You need to make these investments, right? So the cooling infrastructure and the electrical infrastructure providers whose entire business exists to solve the heat and power problems that thermodynamics creates. Like this 1.3 trillion dollars by forecasted by McKinsey is the thermodynamics trade expressed in dollars, right? So very, very important number. Now, moving on, right? The IEA, they project the total demand of energy to go from like 415 to 945 terawatt hours by 2030. And if you look at the difference, right, it's almost 500 terawatt hours. And you compare that to a country like Japan, and if you look at data from Statista, which is also linked here, and I was looking at like how much energy does a country consume in a year, and in 2024, Japan consumed almost 450 terawatt hours of electricity. So in 6 years, guys, in 6 years from 2024 to 2030, we are adding as much electricity as the entire country of Japan consumed in 2030. So 70, 80 years of industrialization, the amount of electricity build out that Japan did is what we're building out in 6 years. That should tell you the scale at which thermodynamics has an impact on artificial intelligence, right? So now let's talk a little more about it, right? So if you strip away AI to its bare bones, right, like to the very foundations of what it is, it's basically, it's basically, like mathematical operations. So you have these matrix multiplications, and what's really happening is at the level of the physical infrastructure, which is the GPU. A GPU has like billions of transistors. For instance, the H100 GPU, which is the most popular hardware used for training today, has 80 billion transistors. And all that's happening in these like matrix multiplications to train a model is transistors. There are these transistors which are switching states. So that's it. That's what is happening. And so basically, every time a transistor switches states, it generates heat, right? So, and for this transition, for these transistors to switch states, you need electricity to power this build out. So which is why you need power, you need grid infrastructure, which basically brings that power from the power generation source to the data center building and to each of these server racks. And from there, we need humongous like liquid cooling infrastructure, because imagine like hundreds of thousands of these GPUs are all stacked in racks and parked in like this huge data center. And so if I don't have cooling infrastructure in and around the data center, like there is so much heat which is being generated that it will just basically melt the entire data center. So that's basically the limits that thermodynamics is imposing as a law of physics on AI trade. That's how physics shows up on the train. That like crazy. So every compute operation is subject to this constraint, right? Which is imposed by thermodynamics. And a constraint neither engineering nor innovation nor any software can solve, right? This is nature like forcing its will on artificial intelligence build out. So I'm not going to go through all of these constraints, but basically, high level TLDR, two main constraints comes out from thermodynamics. One is the Landauer's limit. This is the theoretical floor of compute. Like this was first basically announced by, it was theoretically computed by Rolf Landauer, who was a physicist and a computer scientist at IBM. And he basically said that, at room temperature, 300 Kelvin, it takes a minimum, every single bit erasure operation, which is basically these transistors switching states, generates 2.8 into 10 to the power minus 21 joules of heat in the environment. Now, I want to be clear that none of our chips are operating at this theoretical minimum. Like the current state of the art CMOS chips, which is basically the architecture of the current GPUs, they are operating like millions of times above this theoretical floor, meaning we are generating way more heat for doing our compute operations. And so there was this research which was published by Ho, Erdel, and Bezeroglu, and they basically said that let's ignore the Launder's floor because we're never going to reach it. Let's talk about what is the maximum like practical capacity of how much more efficient can silicon transistors really get before we hit our own engineering limit in terms of how much compute can we do per watt, right? And so we so that research basically calculated that AI GPUs are operating 200 times, 207 times above the maximum efficiency. So that's way still far off from the Landauer's limit, but 200x is the maximum efficiency. The thing is, like, there is capacity to improve chip efficiency to the order of 200x before we hit the practical limits of how much energy per logic operations these chips will consume. The most important thing that you need to know, draw from this, is that while this like 200x gap might sound a lot, the current AI compute demand is scaling like by 4 to 5x every year. So we're demanding more compute for to train our large language models, right? And so all of the efficiency gains, like this, our ability to do more compute per watt, is basically, it doesn't matter because we're consuming so much. They're like the demand for computers so much that we're erasing any benefits from the efficiency that we're generating, right? So this explains why, again, we're like, this explains Goldman Sachs $700 billion number. This explains McKinsey's $5 trillion AI data center build out figure. Now, the second constraint is heat dissipation. Basically, every time compute happens, it generates a lot of heat in the environment. And if you don't figure out a way to remove that heat, it will melt your hardware. And this is where liquid cooling comes into picture, guys. So just to give you a sense of how much heat is generated, like every H100, right, at peak power consumption is drawing 700 watts per chip. Now this was NVIDIA's H100. If you look at the GB200, which is part of their Blackwell series of GPUs, is this consumes a total electricity of 120 kilowatts for 72 Blackwell GPUs, all like crammed together into this Blackwell machine. And so that's like almost 10x, 4 to 10x from the electricity that H100 is rack consumes today. So I tried to look at like we're talking about we're doing more like compute per watt, but what about the direct electricity that we consume? So I looked at 4 previous generations of GPUs that NVIDIA has published, and if you look at that, like from V100 in 2017, it consumed 300 watts of electricity, and we were able to do 0.42 total floating point operations per watt, and from that we've gone to 1,000 watt with B200. So while the energy efficiency, which is basically our ability to do more compute per watt, has increased by 5x, absolute power requirement has also gone up by 3x. And because we look at this in this demand J curve, there is no stopping. Newer models are consuming even more electricity, and at these rates of power consumption, liquid cooling isn't just optional infrastructure; it's foundational. Like if we don't have it, our machines melt, and we have no AI. That's basically it. So to sum up, Landauer is establishing the physical cost of compute, right? It's not something that engineering can solve. It's mandated by physics, right? And heat dissipation mandates cooling infrastructure, which brings us to a very important point that the build out that's happening is not cyclical capex. It's not like once you build and it's done. You will have to continuously supply electricity and power to keep up your AI workloads, and you will need to continually update your cooling infrastructure as well, right? Because there is a life cycle to it. So, so that's what this is. Thermodynamics, it has already decided what the AI infrastructure stack must look like. It's basically a combination of power and electricity and power, electricity, and cooling. So in the next video, I'm going to further expand into this topic. I will take you through what I call as the wattage waterfall of compute, where we start from looking at the electricity consumption of a chip, and we go all the way to a data center, and we talk about these three critical infrastructure and where it shows up. So it's going to be a fantastic report. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, don't forget to subscribe. And once again, the Substack link to the full article lies below with all of the citations and stuff. Thank you so much, guys, for listening and tuning in. I will see you again next week.